Let's scoot ahead. Sunday's Gold Cup quarterfinal against Colombia. What do we need to know about this Colombian side?
So we came into this tournament obviously excited about Linda Caicedo because she's really fucking exciting to watch.
Mm-hmm.
She has scored 2 goals so far this tournament. Nobody's surprised by that. One of those was while Colombia was up 4-0 over Panama. She scored that in the 84th. And then the other goal she scored was essentially to put the last match out of reach. That was versus Puerto Rico in the 53rd minute to put her squad up 2-0. Kind of salt away that one as well. That goal against Puerto Rico gave us yet another glimpse into Caicedo's ceiling, where she receives the pass. The first touch is absolutely perfect. She effortlessly weaves between two defenders. They're completely confused. And then she plays the ball onto her right foot and just smashes it home. I cannot believe what a genius she is on the ball and how quick thinking she is. And then the ability to just rifle shots like that. I know we'll talk more about her. Everybody will. I've also been really impressed with Catalina Usme. She scored 3 goals, 2 assists, and she's probably looked like their most threatening player in that 1-0 loss to Brazil. I was really impressed with her in that match. She had the strike to open up the scoring versus Puerto Rico, absolute rocket. And it looks like Usme, I mean, she just has a nose for the goal and a pure striker's touch to go with it. So with those two up top, Colombia's cooking.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up Usme against Puerto Rico. And it's funny because the color commentator on the U.S. match was complaining about this, like the U.S. attack being so narrow, everybody within the middle third of the field for the most part. And she was making the point, you just have to use the edges, give yourself space. But on this Usme goal, like you mentioned, Caicedo's like all the way wide to the left, kind of dancing around the corner flag. And she's so good, so much gravity that she just creates that space for Usme. And that strike, nobody was touching that. I mean, it just perfectly placed. She had so much space. It didn't matter where the keeper went. Like she would have just sent it the other way. So that was a goal. For the moment, like the Caicedo ball comes in, it's probably a goal at that point. Between Usme and Pavi, who I think has also been really tremendous for Colombia, I think they kind of sneakily pose a threat to the U.S., much along the lines of like what we saw versus Mexico.
I think it's fair. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they got a lot of good players. I'm glad you mentioned Pavi. She's looked really good. I would also keep my eyes peeled for 26-year-old Jorlin Carabali. She was given the opportunity to take, it looks like she's got the green light for free kicks around the goal. She's a center half. She plays for Brighton and Hove Albion. She nearly scored on a set piece from right outside the box versus Puerto Rico. But the keeper made a great save to just barely keep it out. You know, if we're looking ahead, if you're thinking about the Olympics and other international tournaments, frankly, adding Mayra Ramirez to this squad would be especially concerning for the U.S. women's national team. But even without the newly minted Chelsea number 9, I think the Stars and Stripes are going to have to come to play.
I totally agree with that. We obviously saw what Colombia was capable of in the World Cup. You know, they reached the quarterfinals before falling to your Lionesses in a pretty hotly contested affair. That one was, you broke a sweat or two in that one, if I remember correctly. Without Ramirez beating this U.S. team, it's going to be a tall task for the Colombians. But with the way the U.S. has looked, it could happen. I think, like I said, we're just going to have to monitor it. Zooming out, though, with the potential road to the final, having to go through Colombia, then Canada, because they're the 1 seed, and then potentially Brazil, or maybe worse, Mexico waiting for us in the final. If I gave you U.S. versus the field, who are you taking? I'm very curious about this.
If I have to choose, which I do, because this would be a pretty boring podcast if I just refuse to answer a hypothetical question like this, I think I'm going to take the USA.
Okay.
I think the roster can put together the best full 11 of the teams remaining in the tournament. I think it's a matter of Twyla Kilgore and the staff kind of pulling the right levers to get those 11 on the field. Where do you land on this?
All right, well, I'm sort of jumping the gun here. We'll talk about what we saw in the final of the UEFA Nations League, where we saw the World Cup champions from Spain take on France and exactly what they look like. All I'll say is watching Spain versus France, utterly terrifying. The thing I keep going back to is, who on this U.S. team are you really afraid of if you're a Canada or a Brazil or a Colombia? Like Rodman hasn't looked great. Smith's looked a little bit of a mess. Morgan, I'm not really afraid of her. Haran's looked off. Lynn Williams, not a crazy impact so far. So there just is not really, I mean, it's probably Moultrie and Shaw. Like, if we're being honest, just because there's not so much tape on them, and the tape that you do have, it's like they look fucking dynamic. So I feel like these top teams could kind of game plan for us. And it's reminding me of, over the summer, if there are any holdovers from our previous podcast, I did predict Sweden beating the US at the World Cup. And I think if I'm forced to pick here, I have to take the field. I don't think the US is the most skilled team in the tournament at this point, which is wild to say. I don't think they're the smartest team in this tournament. Like, we made that Mexico match really, really hard on ourselves. And I just don't really see the cohesion as a squad. And all of a sudden, our bread and butter, our athleticism, no longer looks like a huge advantage here. Like, I think, people are out there running with us. In some instances, they're like half a step ahead, whether that's an IQ thing or it's physical and it's just quickness and agility related. Either way, like, we're not just blowing past teams like we have in the past. And this isn't the World Cup. This is the CONCACAF Gold Cup, so it's really giving me a good amount of pause. The last thing I'll mention here, I don't think we're going to have the best player on the field when we play Colombia. We can assemble the best 11, but that's a supernova that they have there. Could the U.S. turn it around and win 3 straight? Yeah, I think they can. Will they turn it around and win 3 straight? No, I don't think they will. So that's kind of where I stand with this.
I love it. I mean, I think those are all super fair points. I think the athleticism, to your point, it's certainly close. Anytime the USA could put the combo of, and I think you make fair points about some of these players not playing their absolute best right now. But when the USA can run Rodman, Williams, Lavelle, Horan, Sonnet, who I think is sneaky in this category, Gurma, Dunn, and Niswanger. If you can have all of them on the pitch at the same time, you have quickness and physicality that's going to be real tough for opponents to cope with. But I think you're right. We're not blowing the doors off anybody.
Real quick note on the physicality. I saw a lot more of the U.S. players looking at the ref, trying to get a little something, and kind of getting knocked around a little bit by a smaller, but maybe more intense Mexico side. I mean,
That's fair.
It's just weird to see.
Yeah.
Ovalle was super physical. I think she picked up a yellow card. So the physicality to the eye test is there, but on the field, I'm not sure that we definitely didn't see it in that Mexico match. I don't think I was super locked in enough to kind of see like what it looked like against the DR or Argentina. Maybe I don't think Argentina plays that quite a brand of football, although they were pretty tough physically too. But I think as we progress, Colombia, Brazil, Canada, they've got some sick athletes on that squad as well. So this is going to be tricky. But if the US even if they can make a deep run, kind of pull it together and like brush off this most recent result, I think that's huge for them going to the Olympics. But if we get a quarterfinals performance like we got last stage of the group stage match, I think that's sort of like a little bit of scary, maybe it's scary minutes, not quite scary hours, but scary minutes, I'll say.
I think you're spot on with that for sure. If they look flat against Colombia, now we're talking, like, I feel like looking great and beating Colombia is really good and it helps. Looking flat and getting outplayed against Colombia is like degrees on the negative side, if that makes any sense. Like, it's worse to lose that match than it is
setback.
Better to win. Yeah, I think it would be absolutely considered a setback. And I want to point out, like, in terms of you talking about football IQ and pure skill, I think you raised some really good points on that. I think that is what is going to be the most like lineup dependent part of the squad. I still think, and I think we're probably aligned on this if I'm understanding you correctly, probably some of the USA's best lineups they could put on the pitch still might not be quite as decisive as Canada or have the total package of football IQ and skill as the Brazilian team. So yeah, I think that's a little concerning, but this was always going to happen. Like we talked about it during the World Cup. We've talked about it at length here. I think it is the overarching conversation in women's football right now, especially in the country we live in. And I think a lot of women's national team fans were looking for a real challenge and the opportunity to see the USA win tough games. You got it. That's why
Here we are.
If the Gold Cup is, we're here now. So if the Gold Cup is going to look like this, if the Gold Cup looks as competitive as like the Euros, unless you're going to just fall completely by the wayside, in the long run, it's going to be better for the program, better for the players.
That's a great comparison point. to line it up against the Euros. I think probably the Euros has a little bit of an advantage at this point, but
Sure.
not to say that it can't swing back the other way. I mean, you were batting your eyes at El Salvador earlier this week. We saw what this Mexico team can do. Obviously, a bunch of World Cup sides on this side of the pond as well. This is just great for the game, all in all. And it doesn't mean, if the U.S. does slip a little bit these next coming years, doesn't mean it's over. Duke comes back, the Yankees come back, the Lakers come back. Things tend to be a little cyclical. We would just need to kind of reset a little bit, find a little bit of our new secret sauce. And I think when we talk about some of the young talent, Shaw and Moultrie more specifically, even Niswanger is a little younger, compared to some of the other vets on the side. We did a lot of NWSL draft coverage, a lot of young talent entering the league there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Things happen quickly. We talked about the Spain side, who we'll get into in a little bit here. 10 years ago, they weren't even in the World Cup. And this is going to be their first Olympics this summer. So life comes at you fast.
It sure does, especially in CONCACAF. So I think it's worth mentioning. We mentioned a couple of the players on Mexico's team that, were either in the U.S. Youth National Team program. It might not hurt to look and see when you have these kind of dual national players. If Mexico is really, really high on a player, maybe we should take a second, third, fourth look at that player and be like, wait, why do they want him so much? Because they're clearly building something over there.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on that. There's just going to be a lot of push and pull for talent, no doubt. Either way, Sunday night, 8:15 p.m. Eastern, USA Colombia closes out the quarterfinals. So by that point, we're also going to know who we might be up against if we're able to survive that match. Moving on, we're going to talk a little UEFA Nations League final, Spain versus France, as well as a third place match with first place stakes, Germany versus the Netherlands. So yeah, stick around.
See you across the pond.